My husband lied about buying our teen daughter and her friends alcohol. My husband is a perpetual child, he never really seemed to grow up, and he has a very playful, childish nature. But this time around, his happy-go-lucky attitude led to a child being put in the hospital. When we first met, I loved his free, easygoing nature, but as we've aged and tried to mature he just seems stuck at the age of 19. Some examples of this is my husband quits jobs very easily, he uses substances pretty recklessly, and all around acts like a teenager instead of a man with 2 kids. Our son is 13, and our daughter is 17, they're great kids and they're super open with us about anything going on in their lives. But as my daughter grows up, my husband seems to have a hard time separating himself from my daughter's teenage antics and being a disciplinarian to her instead of a friend. Such as when a couple of months ago, I found out that my husband had caught my daughter and her friends smoking WD in our shed, and instead of punishing her and kicking the friends out, he joined them. I only found this out months later when our son let the truth slip by accident. Aside from random incidents like this, our kids generally are well behaved and usually, I am more worried about their dad screwing than one of them getting into trouble. Well, everything that happened this week just goes to show that I was right to be worried about my husband's never-ending immaturity, and this time he's done real damage. My husband and I decided to take a short vacation together before the kids' school year started, and our house got crazy again. I had a long talk with both of my kids before we left since it would be the longest that we had ever left them on their own. I went over emergency checklists and grocery lists with them repeatedly to the point where my husband said I was smothering them. I still had anxiety about leaving my babies, but my husband was supportive, and we had been having a fantastic trip. That was until our daughter called us in a total panic a couple of days into our trip. The time of the call was strange since it was the middle of the night back in our hometown when my phone rang. When I answered the call, I heard the sounds of chaos and people yelling and scrambling. When my daughter finally spoke, her words were scrambled and she was obviously intoxicated. She tried her best to explain to me that she had brought friends over to the house to drink, and one of them had thrown up all over herself and wasn't breathing. I told her to calm down, call 911 and keep me updated. When I ensured the police were on their way, I hung up and bought an early flight home before waking up my husband and telling him what had happened. He looked so bewildered when I asked him where he thought they got the alcohol, he just gave a worried look and shrugged. I thought that he must be feeling just as scared and surprised as me. I stayed in contact with my daughter the entire time we traveled home. The EMT had gotten her friend to the ER fast enough to pump her stomach, and she was recovering in the hospital with her parents. The entire time we were flying home, my husband didn't seem to be himself. I chalked it up to him being worried about our daughter's friend, but now I see the only thing he was worried about was himself. When we finally got home, my daughter was an apologetic mess. I comforted her even though I was angry at her irresponsibility. I sat her down and asked her seriously where he got the alcohol from. I couldn't believe my eyes when she glanced quickly at my husband and then at the ground. I just knew at that moment that he must have been behind all of this. It made perfect sense, given his personality. I looked at my husband and he glanced down at the floor just like my daughter. I felt like I was scolding another child instead of the father of my kids. I told my daughter to go to her room, and I asked my husband for nothing but the truth. No excuses, no apologies. I just asked him to tell me if he had bought our daughter and her friend alcohol. He started rambling, saying he never meant for them to go overboard, but he just wanted our daughter to feel cool and have fun while we were on vacation. So he bought them multiple handles of vodka since that's what they asked for. I had never been so frustrated, and I started to doubt my entire marriage for the first time. I just asked him why he had trusted teenagers like that and reminded him that he could have unalived another person's child with his stupidity. He looked hurt but said nothing. I was just so angry. I told him that he was an old man now and I was sick of his pathetic attempts to live out his youth through our daughter. That's when he apologized with tears in his eyes and left the room. I wonder if I've been too harsh on him, but it's not like I can be hard on our daughter when it was her own dad that got us into this situation. I will have one more serious talk with my husband about this, and after that conversation, I'll decide if I want to stay in this marriage. My narcissistic husband thought that I slept with his gay friend and demanded a paternity test, so I divorced him and left him miserable. I have been married to my husband for 5 years and we just had our second child. Our first child was a son with blonde hair and freckled skin, a splitting image of my husband. I have naturally red hair by the way, and my husband loves my hair. But for some reason he was glad that our son wasn't a redhead. He was very proud and bragged a lot about how his genes were superior than mine and that's why our son looked so much like him. In fact, the only time he stopped talking about it was when I got pregnant again. Throughout the 9 months, he kept telling everyone that our second child was also going to be a blonde and there was no way to prevent this. I thought this was weird but funny, and went along with him by saying yeah, I also think the baby will have blonde hair. He was really excited because this time we were having a daughter instead of a son. However, his tone completely changed once I gave birth. Our daughter was the opposite of our son, and a complete splitting image of me. She had beautiful red hair and I was so happy for her because she was going to become the most beautiful girl in the world. But my husband showed a concerning lack of happiness. Even before we left the hospital, he kept commenting that the red hair on our daughter was just temporary. And that his genes were just taking their time but would eventually prevail, she would also end up having blonde hair. Again, I didn't get why he was saying all this, but I didn't pay much attention to it. It did bother me that he would avoid holding her, or taking care of her, but I convinced myself that it was nothing. A few weeks later, we held a baby shower for our daughter and my husband invited his gay friend. I surprisingly got along with him since we had a lot in common, and we talked a lot during the party. He also had red hair, but it was obvious that he had dyed it from black, while me and my daughter were natural. He was constantly complimenting how my daughter had the best colored hair and I was really happy. But my husband would sometimes interrupt us, and once again exclaim that the red hair was only temporary. I ended up asking him why he was so adamant on this topic. He explained that since our son had blonde hair, it meant that all our children should be the same because that's how genes work. I tried to explain to him that that wasn't the case at all, but he didn't listen. Anyway, a few days passed and I thought that my husband had finally dropped the topic. But out of nowhere, he came up to me and began demanding a paternity test. That really shocked me because he had never said anything about this before, and with our first child, he was essentially accusing me of cheating on him, something that I would never do. I said that I loved him, so why was he asking for such a thing? He refused to explain and just said that he wanted to be sure. I asked, be sure of what? And kept pressing him to tell me why he was being so suspicious. Being accused of cheating was actually very painful for me, and I wanted to know how he came to that conclusion. After a bit more pressing, he finally cracked and blew up on me while telling me the reason. I saw how you kept talking to my friend at the party. You never talked that much with another guy, so it was obvious what was going on. I knew that my genes would never lose to yours. So the only reason that your second child has red hair is because she isn't my daughter. You probably slept with him and kept it hidden from me. He also has red hair, so it explains everything. His reasoning was absolutely ridiculous, and I reminded him that his friend was gay and already married to another man. Also, he had dyed his hair and his natural hair color was black. I asked him why he couldn't just accept that our daughter looked like me, and her hair color wasn't an unnatural phenomenon that needed to be explained. But he kept telling me to shut up, and that he was getting a paternity test no matter what. The weirdest part was that he wanted a paternity test between our daughter and his friend, instead of our daughter and him. By that point, I had already broken into tears because he was refusing to believe me no matter what. He said that he was leaving, and wouldn't come back home until I had gotten that test done and proved that he was right, and that I had cheated on him. The moment he left, I hugged my daughter and son close to my chest, and cried for a good hour. Then I called my sister to come pick me up because I was leaving. I packed all my clothes and took my kids with me. I just texted my husband that we were over, and that I was going to divorce him. It turns out, he wasn't expecting me to fight back and thought that I would do exactly as he said. He quickly began apologizing for doubting me, and urged me to come back home with the kids. He sent me selfies to prove that he hadn't stopped crying, and was miserable without me. Apparently, he had also accused his gay friend of infidelity, and gotten punched by his husband. The news of his accusations had spread and his entire friend group had cut him off, so he was completely alone now. He said that me and the kids were all he had. But while he was typing, he messed up and ended up saying that his suspicions were 100% justified. So I just blocked him after saying, "Kids? I thought you said you only have one kid. But don't worry, they will be taken care of by someone who loves them for who they are, and not just their hair color." My entitled husband allowed his best man to propose on our wedding day even though I said no. Now he's regretting everything because I want a divorce. Me and my husband have been planning this wedding for over a year. We were agreeing on everything except when the matter of the guest list came up. Now, I knew that my boyfriend was going to make his friend, Jacob, as his best man. Jacob can be a little self-centered at times. When we go out with friends, he would always order the most expensive meal and then later argue that we split the bill evenly because that was just less work. He often makes and cancels plans as he wishes, even though it can mess up my entire schedule. This one time, I was planning on going on a lovely dinner date with my boyfriend. But Jacob showed up at our house unannounced with drinks, and said that he wanted to spend some time with his best friend. I tried telling him that we aren't free today, but my boyfriend insisted that we have our date next week since Jacob was already here. That being said, I supported my boyfriend's decision of making him the best man, because it was his choice and not mine. I thought that I could tolerate him for one day for my future husband's sake, but I was wrong. A few months ago, my boyfriend randomly said that Jacob wanted to propose at our wedding reception. I firmly rejected that idea, because that day was meant for us and not him. Of course, I would be very happy to help him in his proposal, but doing it on our wedding day was just stealing the attention from the newly married couple. I had heard other stories of people doing this, and absolutely despised the idea. My boyfriend agreed with me and told Jacob that he can propose on a later date, or so I thought. Leading up to the wedding, I was asked multiple times whether he could do his proposal during our reception. Jacob argued that it would be the only day where they would both be dressed formally for the pictures, and he wanted a good memory. Every single time I had to shut it down by saying that that day was special to us, and I didn't want to have it ruined. I was surprised that they were so insistent, especially my boyfriend. I wanted my special day to be perfect, and explained that to my boyfriend for the fourth time 1 month before the wedding. That was the last day we talked about this, and I thought they had finally given up on the idea. On the day of the wedding, I noticed my now husband and Jacob talking in secret a few times, but I ignored it thinking it was nothing. Everything, including the ceremony, went amazingly up until the reception. We were sitting, watching a slideshow of our beautiful memories and were about to do our couple's dance, when Jacob suddenly snatched the mic and instructed everyone to be quiet. He had already performed his best man speech before this, so everyone was surprised. I hoped that he wasn't going to do what I think he was, because I had already rejected the idea. I looked towards my husband, hoping he would stop his friend, but to my surprise he had run off and come back holding something. He was holding flowers and a placard that had the words "Will you marry me" on it. As Jacob's girlfriend walked in the middle, my biggest fear came true and I ran off because I just couldn't take it anymore. I shut myself in my room and began crying my eyes out. When my husband walked in the room, he began yelling at me, telling me to grow up. He accused me of ruining the special moment because I was an attention seeker and couldn't stand others being happy. It wasn't the proposal that angered me so much, but the fact that my own husband had completely disregarded my wishes. I had told him multiple times that I didn't want this, and yet he allowed this to happen anyway. I decided that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't care about my opinion. I told him to get out and spent the night alone. The next day, I avoided everyone and went home with my parents, and began calling a divorce lawyer. My husband tried calling me, but he was saying the same thing, that I was acting childish and needed to just get over it. When I sent him the divorce papers though, he realized that I am serious and quickly changed his tone. He began apologizing for going against my wishes, and said he would never do that again. But the doubt had already made its way into my mind. I was no longer sure if I could spend the rest of my life with him, and by extension, Jacob. I told him that he needs to set his priorities. Because if even on his wedding day, he is prioritizing his friend over his wife, then I can't marry him. Jacob hasn't commented on the situation, except of course calling me sensitive and childish, so I am staying firm on my decision to divorce my husband. My husband wanted to open up our marriage, so I started dating his boss. Now he wants to close it. Part 2. The last time I posted, my husband had just found out about his boss and me dating. After my husband saw his boss kiss me at his place of work, he put the pieces together, and it made him upset enough to ask me to close our marriage back up. I was so torn. I felt bad to see my husband hurting, but he had left me in a place of hurt for so long after asking for this arrangement in the first place. I admit I was tempted by the things my husband said in the conversation where he asked to close our relationship again. He just kept saying over and over that he would be better and committed. He kept saying I was the only thing he needed in the world, and he had been blind to that before. These were all words I had been waiting and wishing to hear for so long. Yet hearing them now, I felt nothing but pity for my husband. I still loved him. We had been together for almost 10 years, and what I felt for him was incredibly strong after being life partners for this long. But I still love myself more, and as I said in my initial post, I had strong feelings for my boyfriend already. I told my husband that I loved him, but I had a say in this relationship too, and I didn't want to close our marriage back. He was a mess at this answer. At one point, he got on his knees to beg me to reconsider, but I stood firm. I wouldn't hurt myself again to prioritize my husband's feelings. For the next couple of months, my husband went through a disorienting array of behaviors towards me. For the first few months, he was incredibly loving and attentive to me. He was cooking for us every night and insisted we have dinner almost every night together at home. He bought me flowers every day for 2 months and tried to initiate intimacy literally every single night. These are all things he's never really done for me before, so I was surprised and happy with all these changes. Although it did seem sort of performative of him to only start being a good husband now in an effort to win me back for himself. If he did love me, where had this treatment been before? He still seemed sad on the nights when I left him to go see my boyfriend, and I noticed he was seeing his own girlfriend less and less. Anyway, I was feeling conflicted, but my boyfriend and I's relationship continued to blossom as we learned more about each other and kept spending time together. About a month ago, my boyfriend had taken me on a very luxurious and intimate date. He reserved an entire restaurant for us and then arranged a helicopter ride for us after dinner. It was such a beautiful and romantic night and we had an amazing time together. There was no special occasion, and when I asked him why he had done all this, he said he just wanted to show me how much he appreciated his time with me, and I deserved to be treated like the catch that I am. Before I left my boyfriend's house the next morning, I broke down crying while venting to him, saying that I wished my situation could be less complicated and that I was sorry if he felt like our relationship was unconventional because I was still a married woman. My boyfriend just listened and held me as I cried. He held me and stroked my hair and said he didn't care about my husband, he was just grateful for any time he got to spend with me, and that I was a blessing in his life, and he was just happy he got to meet a wonderful woman like me. Then he got up to make me my favorite flavor of tea. He had found out my favorite brand of tea a month ago and kept it stocked at his apartment since then. When he handed me the tea, he looked into my eyes and asked if it could be his turn to be honest with me. That's when he told me that he had never met anyone like me and that he had fallen in love with me. As soon as he said that, something just felt so right in my body and mind. I said it back to him, and we cried happy tears together. We didn't worry about anything else at that moment, We just enjoyed the vulnerability, nothing could ruin that pure moment for us. Or so I thought, but I still don't regret telling him the truth about my feelings. I do love him, but I wish it hadn't. Resulted in the mess that it did. After my boyfriend returned to work after this date, I guess he had started telling some of his coworkers about how well his relationship had been going, and it must have gotten back to my husband. My husband didn't react well, and I almost dropped my phone when he called me the other day from the police station. That's when I found out that my husband had attacked my boyfriend at their place of work. Apparently, he had overheard some people talking about how his boss had been bragging about his partner, and it had sent him over the edge. He sounded like such a jealous child on the phone. He had entered his boss's office in a jealous rage and tried to punch him straight in the face. When my boyfriend deflected, my husband picked up a coffee mug and smashed it across his head. The cops had arrested him in front of his entire office, and I assumed my boyfriend had gone to the hospital for a head wound. My husband spoke on the phone with so much hate and bitterness, and during that call, I realized the sane, good man I had once married was long gone, and the last bit of love I had for him wilted inside my chest. He spoke about himself as if he were a victim instead of an unhinged criminal who had attacked another man for his own ignorant reasons. He said that he just couldn't stand his boss keeping us apart, and he had just gotten so angry after hearing that he was talking about me as if I was his wife instead. I said nothing on the phone, I just thought about the choices I faced. I could go bail my husband out of the police station, or I could go visit my boyfriend in the hospital.
My parents threw me out as a child, and then expected everything from me when my grandparents died. My mother and father had me when I was 16 and used to lay hands on me all throughout my childhood. My father used to yell at 5-year-old me and blame me for ruining his dreams and aspirations in life. I was already unloved, but when I was 6 my younger sister was born, and I was left completely uncared for and unwanted. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. And as my sister got older, it went from me sharing a bedroom with her, to me kicked out of the room entirely. I slept on the couch for 2 years, then the couch was put into the basement, meaning I could sleep either in the basement or on the floor. When I was 10, my parents decided they were going to move away. But this move did not include me. I ended up actually being fine with this, as my grandparents had agreed to take me in. My life was instantly better. I got my own room again, and my grandparents gifted me a brand new N64 in 1996. I was finally happy. As time went on, I grew up and eventually moved out. But later moved back in to help my grandparents' house as they were getting old and living off their retirement savings. So some rent money from me went a long way in paying the bills. Then my grandma died. She was mugged by a robber, who took her life. My grandpa was heartbroken. He also passed about a year and a half later. He took his life. Pretty much everything they owned was willed to me. Their savings, their house, their vehicles, their stuff, everything. The house was long paid off, and Grandpa knew how to keep up with its maintenance. In fact, after Grandma died he kind of doubled down on renovating the place. He had the roof redone, the house was repainted by us inside and out, and we fixed a lot of little things. Grandpa's neighbor George even came by to help redo the plumbing. One morning I was fixing breakfast and my grandpa never came downstairs. You couldn't keep the man from his bacon. So I went to check on him. I found him there, suspended via a rope. My parents made Grandpa's funeral a crap show. They didn't bother to show up for Grandma's. They were too busy. And at Grandpa's funeral they didn't seem to grieve at all. My sister also showed up wearing a brightly colored designer dress. Which I wasn't happy about as it was a church clothes-only function. I noticed my parents repeatedly whispering to each other and glaring at me whenever I looked at them. Come to find out at the will reading that my parents knew that they'd been disinherited long ago for their treatment of me. And they thought it extremely unfair I got everything. They threatened to sue me to contest the will. And I got repeated calls and messages from my father, mother and sister telling me I needed to do the right thing and give my father what was supposed to be his. I told them all to flake off in far more unsavory words. My parents ended up taking me to court to challenge the will. But the judge ruled in my favor after seeing the will and hearing us both out. So it wasn't a long drawn-out legal battle. The judge even looked at my parents with absolute disgust after seeing the will and hearing about their mistreatment of me in my childhood. He called my father a terrible parent, and that my grandparents were right to disown him. My father just hung his head in silence, but he made sure to stop me outside the courtroom and tell me I was always the biggest mistake of his life. And that if he could go back in time, he'd make sure I never existed. He should have been a football star. And instead he has to wear a name tag for a 9 to 5. I told him that mistake or not, Grandma and Grandpa could see what kind of nasty person he was. I didn't ask to be born. And the only real love I ever got was from my grandparents. And he was no father of mine anymore. I got a few more threatening and harassing phone calls, as well as some letters from my parents. All demanding money among other things. But over time they just stopped because I completely stonewalled them. The last call I ever got from them was telling me that my sister needed a kidney transplant and if I could help them out. I actually agreed and told them to meet me at a hospital that was a 2-hour drive from them. They rode out, and I never showed up. I blocked their number as soon as I got the first call that they're there. Nitpicky manager forced to resign after mismanaging new service. Several years ago I was working at one of the big hardware stores in my area. It's a household name and has some upward mobility with decent pay for the area. I never really found a niche there after my first year and a half. I learned quickly though, so they kinda made me a Swiss Army employee. I could work hardware, plumbing, mix paint, make keys, prepare contracts for installs and knew all the features and flaws of the appliance models we sold. I was happy to do this because I was building a reputation as someone who could do everything. 2 years in, a new program was implemented that I was uniquely qualified to assist with. They created a new position for me. It was marketed as an all-in-one renovation/remodel service for interiors. I was to assist the designer with product selection, product information, contracts and local marketing for this service. Everyone involved was super excited about it. Note, I was still only making $10 an hour in 2015 for this. The problem was that because this was brand new, no one knew how it should work. The designer basically had to figure it out for herself while I tried to catch her up with all of the store and product knowledge I had accumulated during my unique experience with the company. Issues with the program: it was way too expensive. Product to be used had to come from one of our stores, which was limiting. No one knew about it. It was a rocky start. Coworkers would call me over to talk to customers if they mentioned working on a big project, but that's all we had. No completed jobs to reference or anything provided by corporate to get us running. We made our own stuff. I put together a video advertising the service and got the nod from management to use the company card to purchase a TV and media player to roll the video on repeat. We built vignettes in the store to showcase our design ability. Enter Devin, the assistant manager. He had actually been involved in the project from the beginning, and had been pretty supportive and brought good energy at first. But I think he got fed up with issues that we couldn't control. We were, on average, charging $3,000 more for a small bathroom remodel on labor alone. Consulting and design fees were also worked into the final cost. The product was discounted to basically being tax-free, but as I mentioned, options were limited to products the company sold. It was just too expensive to make many sales on the poorer side of town, where almost everyone knows some kind of contractor or tradesman with connections. It wasn't a good market for this program, but we did manage to start hitting our numbers. Number 7 in the region for the brand new program was not bad. And just when we finally started getting some business and a rhythm around 8 months in, Devin decided that it was not working fast enough for him. Obviously the designer was to blame since he had no authority over the contractors or setting prices. She didn't know what she was doing and he was going to make some changes. He honestly didn't do much besides hover, bring bad energy and make terrible suggestions. He didn't understand the scope of what we had to do to get a customer out the door and happy. He forced us to cut corners and get the sale as quickly as possible without concern for liability or what was realistic in terms of timelines. Customers felt rushed and got nervous. They backed out. We came to a standstill. We would only have 2 or 3 designs in progress at a time, but suddenly after working our asses off building the program, we had no customers for the first time in 6 months. Obviously Devin was not subjecting us to his authority hard enough. So he went harder, and fired the designer. I lost my patience. I'm a chill dude, but I had been working my SS off for this company, making peanuts on the promise that I was working towards something. I endured working for the incompetent managers that got their positions because they started working there at 18 and made it their life. The toxic alpha male I will lead, you will follow bullshit was too much. So I started bullying him back, making fun of him in a teasing way where he couldn't really react without looking bad or losing control. I did that for a while and he left me alone to run the program in the interim since I was the only option. The designer and I had become friends though, so I was still mad about how it went down. I wasn't finished yet, but I didn't know what to do. Eventually they got another designer and Devin had me moved back to what I had been doing before. Passed over for several promotions that I was more than qualified for. Bad luck, but I was done with the place. One day we were sent an email link to an anonymous manager review survey. The store computers were set up with an always-on and logged-in user profile, so I wrote down the link and verified with a coworker that they weren't unique. In every department I visited that day, I wrote a review for Devin. All different ratings, some good, some bad, but I made the good ones so that they sounded bad, but as if I didn't know it was bad. I did that maybe 10 times. It wasn't character assassination or anything, just opinion-based stuff with some vague examples so no one could figure out it was me. I didn't lie either, I just said what people don't usually say out loud. He would barely look at anyone after that. A couple of weeks later he resigned his position as assistant manager and took an exterior design position at the other end of the store, as far away from the departments he had been over before. Basically the same thing as what we had done with interiors, but he was in the designer's shoes. I left a couple of months later to work tech support for DHS, but while I was still in training for that, my friends from the store told me he had gotten fired. Maybe he learned something? He should at least have learned how my designer friend felt. They were both fired at Christmas. My Christian wife wants to send our teen daughter to conversion camp because she's lesbian. When my daughter found out she did something horrible. My wife has always been really religious and that never bothered me before, but she went too far last night. Our daughter said she had something really serious to talk to us about. She ended up coming out to us as a lesbian. I was really glad that she was able to trust us with something like this because I could tell she was really nervous during our talk. I told her that her sexuality doesn't change how we feel about her in any way, that we were proud of her, and we would always support her. By the end of it, she hugged us and said she loved us. Then she went to her room and I asked my wife how she felt because I noticed that she was very silent throughout the whole conversation. She only nodded and agreed to what I was saying. She said that she needed some time to think about what was discussed. I told her there was nothing to think about. Our daughter is a lesbian and there's nothing we can do about that besides support her and be happy for her. It's as simple as that. She just kept repeating that I needed to give her time to process all of this. I have never seen my wife act this way before and it caught me off guard. I do know that she's struggling to deal with this because she's Christian and thinks that homosexuality is inherently wrong, but she never expressed malicious intent. Even so, this is our daughter we're talking about and she has to deal with this in the best way possible. Today, my wife acted very cold and harsh towards my daughter. Whenever my daughter tried to talk to her, she would ignore her and only respond when my daughter badgered an answer out of her. She came to me to talk about my wife's behavior and she said that she thinks telling us was a bad idea because her mom is acting really weird around her. She thinks that her mom hates her now. I tried my best to reassure her that her mom loves her. And we just have to give her time to adjust to this new change. I told her that I was going to talk to her mom about it, but everything was going to be okay in the end. Me and my big mouth. Later that night, I was talking to my wife and demanded to know why she was treating our daughter like she had just done something horribly wrong. She answered by saying that what she was doing was wrong. We needed to send her to a conversion camp immediately to help her realize she was committing so many sins, and she wasn't going to go to heaven now. I was shocked. I told her she was going to put her own feelings aside for the sake of our daughter because she is 16 and needs all the love and support we have to offer. I wasn't going to let her make our daughter feel like a bad person for something she can't control. It took so much courage for our daughter to tell us, given that she also knows that my wife is religious. How do I get my wife to accept my daughter's sexuality and stop viewing it as a bad thing? Update: it's been over 2 years since my original post, and over 1 year since I lost my daughter to suicide. My wife couldn't accept my daughter for who she was and was really adamant on sending her to conversion camp. My daughter found out and cried a lot. She said she wished she was straight so that her mom could love her. That broke my heart. I kept having talks with my wife to get her behavior to change, but she kept avoiding my daughter like she was the plague. The final straw was when I saw her searching up the nearest conversion camps and calling them. We got into a huge fight and told her there was no coming back from this. So, we began the divorce process. She moved out and went to live with her parents, whom my daughter absolutely adored. They of course sided with my wife when they found out, resulting in my daughter being even more devastated. The amount of nights where I held my daughter in my arms as she cried herself to sleep at night asking why she had to be the way she was, why her mother hated her, asking again and again if I hated her despite how many times I would tell her I love her unconditionally, including her sexuality, were too many to count. I put my daughter into actual therapy to help her try to process all of this. I cut back my work shifts to work less hours to try to be there for her. I tried to keep anything related to the divorce as private as I could because I didn't want her stressing about that even more. I keep on thinking what I could have done to stop that day. What else I could have done, what else I could have said. Every day I wake up thinking I should have done more. She left a note explaining how it's not my fault, but what else am I supposed to think? I haven't talked to my ex-wife for 8 months now. I'm in therapy, but to be honest I don't think it's working. Sometimes I wander into her room, sit on her bed, and sob for what feels like hours. I keep on expecting to see her walk home from school. To see her smile, to hear her laugh from down the hall. I miss you more than anything, Jesse. I'm sorry.
My husband wanted to open up our marriage, so I started dating his boss. Now he wants to close it. Part 3. It didn't take me long after my husband called from the police station to make my decision. I hung up my phone, sat down, and stared at myself in the mirror for a while, thinking about what I should do. I looked into the mirror, trying to see myself as my husband did, then trying to see myself as my boyfriend did. I realized my husband loved me for the things I could do for him, for the ways which I had served him during our marriage. He never loved me for my personality or my accomplishments. On the other hand, after we told each other we loved each other for the first time, my boyfriend listed the specific things he loved about my personality. My boyfriend would hold my face in his hands every time I saw him, and thank me for my time and for my existence. I started to cry when I realized my boyfriend had been giving me the love I had been searching for my entire life. He made me feel more wanted and beautiful than my husband had ever made me feel in almost 10 years of marriage. I cried harder when I realized that I was watching the death of my old life. My husband had been slipping through my fingers for so long, but I hadn't been ready to let him go until this very moment. This was an intense moment of clarity for me, and even though I knew the decision was life-changing, I decided to go visit my boyfriend in the hospital instead of bailing out my husband. When I got to the hospital and saw my boyfriend with a large bandage across his head, I cried and apologized to him for his injury being my fault. He reassured me that this was my husband's fault and there was no way either of us could have predicted he would fly off the handle like that. I immediately told him I was leaving my husband, that I could never stay with someone so violent who had hurt him like this. At this point, my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 9 months, but when I thought about leaving my husband, I thought more about my own life than my boyfriend and I's relationship. Even if I didn't feel this strongly about my boyfriend, I would have always left my husband for attacking another man and making a scene like this at his job. If I learned anything from the past year, it was that I only needed myself, and that I deserved to feel valued and cherished in any relationship. I went home with my boyfriend that night and cared for his injury. The next day, I got right to looking for divorce lawyers. I knew my husband's family would be bailing him out soon, so I returned to our house and packed all my essentials before reserving a hotel room for the next week. I ended up barely staying in the hotel room since my boyfriend insisted that I would be more comfortable at his place. I wanted to be there for him as he healed, and things just felt so right with my boyfriend, so I ended up staying at his place after leaving my husband. I never left, and the last time I spoke with my husband directly was the day he called me from the police station. He tried to contact me after getting bailed out, even blowing up my phone when he got home and found half my stuff gone. But I didn't care. His mistakes meant nothing to me now, and a month after he was arrested, he was served with divorce papers. I could not believe my ears after I learned that my ex-husband had returned to his old job to confront my boyfriend in the parking lot on the day he was served with divorce papers. Luckily my boyfriend was able to defend himself against my unathletic ex, and he was arrested again. Apparently, The police had found a knife on him, and he had been screaming at my boyfriend for ruining his life. I was so scared for my boyfriend when I heard about this. He could have easily been seriously injured, and I thanked God for sparing him. Yet I wasn't shocked that my boyfriend had been able to defend himself against my husband. Though he is older than my husband, he is much more fit and agile. At this point, the court granted us both restraining orders against him, and all this evidence made our divorce speedy. The next thing I knew, my ex-husband was serving jail time, while I was selling out house and splitting the profit between us. Even though everything that happened was so stressful and traumatic, after a couple of months, things slowed down, and I found myself enjoying a peaceful life with my boyfriend. He welcomed me into his spacious penthouse apartment with open arms. He had told me he didn't expect me to give him all my time after my marriage had just ended, but he loved having me around and told me I never had to leave. Every day when he came home from work, he would give me a deep kiss and a tight hug and tell me how much he loved coming home to me. It's been about a year since my divorce was finalized, and I have started thinking seriously about my future with my boyfriend. He has spent every day that he's known me and treated me like a goddess, and I'm so grateful that we found each other despite everything. He has told me that he would love to make me his wife one day, but only when I'm ready. He always prioritizes my feelings, and I can't believe I accepted anything less than this true love for so long in my life.
My ex broke my heart, so I broke him. I'm 28, dated a guy for almost 3 years. To make it easy to understand, I'll refer to my ex as Sam, who's also 28. It was a long-distance relationship. We met through a dating app and we hit it right off. The first few months were great, we had so much in common, and to me, it really seemed like this relationship was going to be serious. He was my first boyfriend. I held off on dating to focus on my studies and my career. He supported me throughout my master's and my career development, and I helped him through major life changes that he was going through. I had always wanted a first and last relationship. I thought I had hit the jackpot with this guy. I travel a lot for my job. The company sends me out to different states to attend conferences, conduct training, etc., and most of these conferences are held in Sam's hometown. Even though it was a long-distance relationship, we would see each other more often because of the convenience of my job. I would stay in his apartment whenever I was there, and he would also fly to my hometown and stay at my apartment for weeks at a time. Everything was great until after our first anniversary. He started to become distant. During this time, I hadn't been able to fly down to his hometown because I was busy with training in our office. I never made him feel like he was less of a priority, and I would always text throughout the day. Whenever we were together, I basically did what I thought a good girlfriend should do. I really thought I was doing good for my first relationship. Until he asked for a break. I admit, I did beg and cry when he asked for it, but ultimately, I couldn't do anything and decided to accept it and move on. I was heartbroken, but I poured my attention into my job and eventually got promoted. 2 months passed and Sam reached out to me with a really long message. Basically, he was apologizing for the sudden breakup without an explanation, and he explained why he had to do it. And that he loved me and he knew that he was wrong, but if I wasn't willing to give him a second chance, then he would just settle for us being friends because he said I was a great person and a great friend. My trust was ruined at this point, but I wasn't really mad at him, and I admit that I still loved him, so we decided on starting all over again, but as friends. To make it short, we ended up dating again after 5 months. I really thought this was like his redemption arc and he'd be more attentive and loving towards me, and he was. For like 3 months, and then he started being distant again. I slowly noticed a pattern with his actions. I asked a close friend of mine for some advice, and she told me that Sam was breadcrumbing me. He would give me attention and love and then suddenly stop, so I would start to beg for more. After our second anniversary, he suddenly ghosted me. No message, no nothing. I was blocked on everything. I couldn't call or text his number. Nada. This time, I wasn't as heartbroken. Instead, I was contemplating what the heck this man was trying to do to me. He was toying with my emotions when all I had given him was genuine love. It started to piss me off, but again, I didn't want to do anything about it and just moved on. 3 months go by and Sam was back in my DMs. This time with a different message. He wasn't asking for another chance or anything, he was just explaining why he had done it. Basically, it was all half-assed explanations. He was leaving his old job and he got busy with a new job, and he didn't have time for me, so he thought he'd get everything done before he would fly down to my hometown and reconcile. He asked if he could come and visit me and we can talk it all out. During this time, I had found out that during the time we were together, he was cheating on me, and apparently it didn't work out with that girl, so he came back to me. He had done this in the past as well. All of this was confirmed by a friend I had who moved to his hometown, who became my source of intel. This is when I felt a switch turn on in my head. I knew what he was doing, and instead of turning him down and just moving on, I wanted him to feel the way I felt when he did all of this to me. I told him he could come and visit me and that I'll be waiting for him. At this point, I knew he knew I was acting out of character. He asked me if I was really okay with meeting him and talking things out, and I said yes. A week passed and he actually flew down to my hometown, and he had the audacity to come to my apartment and stay with me for 3 weeks. I welcomed him with open arms nonetheless. We talked and he apologized over and over again. He kept insisting that he wasn't good enough for me to give him another chance. He kept saying how much of an a-hole he was for doing that to me, and I never deserved all of that. He would understand if I wanted to throw him out right then and there. I hugged him and told him that I still loved him and that I wanted to make things work between us. He was taken aback because he wasn't expecting this reaction from me. I told him that he was the only one who understood me, and I never felt this kind of attraction with anyone else. He hugged me back and told me how much he missed me and how much he loved me. We agreed to spend the 3 weeks together rebuilding our relationship. For the next 3 weeks, I treated him like a king. showering him with love and affection, cooking for him, making all of his favorite dishes. We would go out on dates almost every night. I bought him video games that he liked and I would let him play all night while I sit next to him and just watch him enjoy himself. I effed his brains out every night. He would whisper words of love for me after we did the deed and it was exactly what I wanted. 3 weeks was up and he had to fly back to his hometown. He couldn't keep his hands away from me the day before he had to leave. He kept telling me how much he wanted to stay and live with me. I played right into his fantasy and told him I wanted that as well. I, in fact, did not want that at all. I told him I'd come and visit him the next chance I get. When he left, I felt relieved. Faking everything was exhausting but I wasn't done yet. We kept texting, calling and FaceTiming each other when he got back to his hometown. Something he rarely wanted to do with me before. I wanted to drive him mad. I wanted to drive him crazy like what he almost made me went through. I started ignoring his texts and calls until he became desperate. I would make up some excuse about being super busy and that I would make it up to him. Next thing I did was to randomly post pictures of me and some male coworkers that would make it seem like we were on a date. I would post them on my IG story and quickly delete them once Sam had viewed them. He would blow up and start calling me asking who that was and where I was. I would tell him, "What are you talking about, babe? I've been so busy I haven't even gotten the time to be on my phone," which is an obvious blatant lie, but the more I did it, the more Sam started to question himself. Started to question if he truly saw what he saw. He would apologize and admit that he missed me so much and wanted to be with me as soon as possible. He was slowly becoming obsessed with me and that's what I was hoping for. It got to the point where it drove him mad whenever I started to act coldly towards him. I would always play dumb whenever he would ask why I was acting so cold. He would ask if I wanted to break up with him and I would say, "Why would I do that? You're the only one for me." Whenever I would say those words, his face would go from relief to worried in a split second. I kept doing all of these for months until the slight thought of me leaving him drove him insane. He once flew down to my hometown unannounced when I was acting cold towards him. He banged on my door at 10 p.m. and he only brought a backpack with him with a few clothes. He clung to me that night and obviously I reassured him that I wasn't going to leave him and I once again, excuse my French, gave him effing of a lifetime. He had to fly home the next day and I reassured him that I'll always be here for him. Little did he know that I'll be temporarily sent to Europe for a month-long training and I'm not planning on contacting him. The moment I leave, I'm blocking him on everything and I'll be deleting all of my social media accounts. Am I a psycho? Probably.